And the final story of today is going to be some updates on the Mr. Beast lawsuit, or his name was named in a lawsuit because we got a new interview specifically put out by an alleged participant of this game show from a creator known as Atozy. So we got some more information regarding the actual details of the Beast games and where this alleged lawsuit came from that we covered in last week's show. And what it sounds like is that the production was kind of broken into two sections. So you had an LA percentage, an LA reality that was part of this 2,000 people, and then the winning 1,000 people then went to Canada, where the Amazon Studios side of the production then took place. So what it sounds like is likely going to be happening, and what we found from this interview that I'll leave down in the description down below, was that Mr. Beast's production company was running the first half as, I imagine, a big YouTube video or a set of YouTube videos to promote the fact that Beast Games was going to be on Amazon or Amazon Prime, and then the second half, when the final 1,000 contestants, so half of the original people who took part, was in a position where they went to Canada. And what it sounded like from the interview was that the Canadian side, so the last 1,000, was a lot better run, and there was a lot of the issues only really stemmed from the Las Vegas side of the production. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this conversation today, and we're going to pick up some specific points in that interview as well that has come out. And of course, I will leave the interview itself along with all the other resources in the show down below. The first claim that the interviewee made was that it was a comms challenge from the Mr. Beast team that was helped to bring everyone out to the game show in LA. It was claimed that people were given their jerseys to wear, etc. It had their name, their number, contestant, etc. And then they were asked to sign NDAs. Now, this is most likely due to... So this is where the first kind of issue, I think, for me really sits, is when you're kind of trying to get through, and this is a logistical thing, sure, but when you're getting given your stuff for this game show, of course you've got to sign contracts, of course you've got to sign waivers, but do you give people enough time to understand what they're signing, understanding how and where and what they're signing, right? Or is it kind of a conveyor belt, right? We've got obviously 2,000 people, that's a lot of people, but do you give them the opportunity, or do you give them the position, or be in the position where you can actually read the contract you're signing, read the NDA you're signing, etc., right? When does that NDA change? And this is where I think parts of the planning issues, or parts of the logistical issues that we're going to talk about in this Las Vegas section of the Mr. Beast Games production really started to have issues, and this seems to be the main crux of the lawsuit and the main crux of the problem here. Did you know that 98.7% of you do not subscribe to the channel? So I would really, really appreciate it if you're enjoying the content, enjoying the topics, enjoying the show, if you could subscribe to the channel so you can be notified when I put out a new topic video. Followed by then them having to wait hours in, quote, trash bags, where many people will get hot, etc. There was claims that food and water was given out, but it sounded like they were waiting around for 8 hours or so. Again, this is likely to do with either not having the right logistics in place, or being in a position where you haven't run something of that scale, so you aren't gonna, and maybe perhaps giving Jimmy the benefit of the doubt here, that he maybe miscalibrated or didn't think about it enough to bring in a logistics company to help with the logistics of this, necessarily someone with. And even though it says in his how to be successful on a Mr. Beast production, the document that got leaked a couple of weeks back, we're in a position where they say one thing in their official documentation, but clearly the consultants they're using are allegedly either not doing it right, or they're getting it wrong, and then leading to these issues, right? Because that does seem to be the issues. It's fine if you want to wait around, but the reason why people would be put in trash bags is so that obviously when they're moving from public place to public place, so from a hotel to a bus to then move to the stadium, for example, that they're not obviously seen, and it's kind of keeping it under wraps a little bit. But all they would had to have been, all they was had to the conversation would have just added in, oh, you don't need to wear these inside because no one's going to see you, right? When the only time you need to actually, bring them or wear them is moving from point A to point B, right? So it sounds like a little thing, but obviously there's a lot of issues that have been caused by this. People getting hot, people getting concerned, some people fainting, etc. Those kind of things has happened because of just not communicated effectively, and maybe not making sure that those scripts are in place when it comes to, say, signing, because you're going to see everyone when you're signing NDAs anyway. So it's more about how do you articulate to those people, and how do you deal with the logistics. And it sounds a lot like a logistical issue, and for me, and we'll go over it a little bit more, that it is more of a logistical issue. So the interviewee claimed that due to the fact that they were moving 2,000 people, it was nearly 10 p.m. end quote at night before they had a level of quote sit down meal, right? Apparently they were offered a little bit of breakfast, etc. But that one of the issues is the kind of, I guess, the malnourishment or the lack of ability to get food and water. There was some talk in this interview about they were giving out food and water, but again, there's just more and more evidence coming back that it was just a really, really bad planned, the logistical side was really badly planned, and this is some more evidence for that as well. And this would all be done in pre-production, right? So all of this planning should have taken in pre-production. It's little things. How are we going to logistically give 2,000 people bathroom breaks and not have a knock-on effect to filming? How long is each challenge going to take? You can plan these things, etc. But when you get into production, these challenges can take place. And allegedly they worked with experts to realise or think about these challenges moving forward, or how long these challenges would take. But then there was contradictory things. And when you're dealing with this volume of people, you have volumes of issues regarding, their medication, etc. Things like this. And I think that's where those claims really come from. There was more challenge misplanning, where one challenge was to break teams into groups of 500 each, where they had 400 jerseys for each team, end quote, and some big guys just ran up and grabbed the jerseys, starting to hand them out to other bigger guys, clearly giving them an advantage in the tug of war style challenge. It's likely that the bigger guys would ended up at the start, so whoever would have done on the losing side would have ended up getting pulled over each other. So it would have been likely that the game is normal for fun and not for $5 million. So there was also quotes where people were falling over each other. No one was trying to injure anyone in this challenge, but so the first specific challenge that was talked about was basically a massive tug of war, right? And the issue with this massive tug of war is when you have that number of people, anyone who's played tug of war will all obviously understand that when the losing team gets physically pulled one way, the back of that team is going to get crushed up and potentially on top of each other. So that's where allegedly some of those injuries potentially came from, those concerns potentially came from regarding, the bigger guys going after or looking at or etc. being in a position where is it manipulatable? Sure, but is it fair to say, or is it fair that there should be safeguards in place when it comes to safeguarding, because you're playing for 5 million, right? So this is life-changing money. This is in a position where this money is legitimately life-changing for a lot of people and for everyone really. And it's that question of how and when did these things go, and it just sounds more and more as if the planning and the scope and Mr. Beast production, not him specifically, but the production company or his team wasn't prepared and wasn't ready for this scale of production. And I think people like Amazon Studios, etc., they would be more used to something this size, hence why Canada specifically went a lot better, allegedly, from the interviewee's point of view. So it also sounded like, just because of how long these productions took, how these challenges took to do, that mostly that it was filmed inside the stadium and it was filmed at night, right? So the issues you've got there is, of course, if people are sleeping in the day, their circadian rhythm is going to have to be shifted to basically being up all night and then sleeping in the day, right? And anyone who's either been up all night or being in a position where you've had to either have lack of sleep or etc., you'll know you feel horrible, but also you have higher levels of adrenaline and you're in a position where you're physically not going to be as capable. And in a physical challenge like the first one was, you're potentially going to operate or be in a different boat than someone who is well rested, right? So again, some more signs of misplanning or misjudgment was the concept that, the interviewee claimed that, part of the, from their view, part of the challenge was, being lack hygiene, not getting necessarily undergarments and etc. But also there was claims that the interview said, I quote, can't stress enough that you're able to walk out at any time. If you did not feel comfortable in the situation or for anything, you could just leave. The interview also claimed that he was paid $2,000 for less than 2 weeks worth of work. Quote, if you had got out in the first Las Vegas challenge, you would have been paid $2,000, end quote. However, the interviewee did say that he wasn't aware of any NDAs in regards to only getting the money if you signed an NDA, right? So there's been this conversation about, are people being paid off not to join a class action lawsuit, etc. The lawsuit itself does claim and does talk about the fact that these contestants should potentially be treated as employees, right? And that would of course change how much they're paid, the rights they're entitled to, etc. The interviewee also claimed that a lot of the lawsuit is mostly BS. Quote, you're kind of a bitch or a little baby in general for not getting food when you needed it. Quote, around 1,000 people who made it to Canada wanted to be there and are desperately willing to tell their stories but can't due to NDAs, end quote. There was also claims within this interview where a lot came from casting companies. So the question was, did the people that you were bringing into this challenge really, did they need the money? But also, are they going to be people that have necessarily bigger egos and are going to find it quote unquote harder? Surely it isn't part of the point is to be, mentally tough enough to deal with this conversation or deal with this challenge or deal with the reality of, it's a week of uncomfortability or 2 weeks, to potentially win, 5 million in that respect as well. So there's that conversation. But did those people from LA, did those people that allegedly came from this casting company, were they in a position where they're a little bit more egotistical, you could say, right? Do they necessarily need the money? Are they doing it for the exposure, etc.? Things like that. And I think that's where the lines get slightly blurred. And some of them claimed to, quote, potentially have large egos and wanting to control stuff that they couldn't control. So it sounded like, again, some more evidence also came to light about Mr. Beast wasn't really ready for a production size of this level as well. There was also some claims where, quote, unfortunately got pushed over. People broke ribs and hands too. Keep in mind these people were taking part were all ages from 18 to 75. So I think a lot of it is, there's been, a lot of this we've covered is, there's been now clearly lack of planning from the beginning stages, clearly lack of planning when it comes to the scale of the challenges, clearly lack of planning when it comes to 2,000 people specifically, being brought into this stadium to take part in this massive game show. Were the right consultants really put on? Was the right funding put into the right places? Do they need to, or would they have needed to put obviously more money into the logistics side of catering and sleeping and housing, and there's a lot more details that in the interview, and this is only covering what I've managed to take from first half of this interview, and in next week's show we'll be talking about the second half. But I think the clear thing is here, I don't know whether the lawsuit will, as I said in last week's show, I don't think the lawsuit will necessarily go anywhere, because even if it does, and even if it's seen to be wrongful, and it does seem as if there is a level of lack of planning and a level of inconvenience and a level of shit taking place, that it will necessarily be played out in public, because Mr. Beast isn't going to want that on his reputation. He's already got enough going on with everything else that we've already discussed in previous episodes, and this could be a level of him selling out potentially, or this could be just a bump in the road for him. But they're my thoughts on the first half of this interview with one of the people specifically who took part in the Mr. Beast games. It does sound like most of the production is finished now, and it would be in post-production if it is going to take place, but there's still questions in the air on whether there is or isn't, or whether it is or isn't. So that's things to consider. But thank you ever so much for listening to this part of the show. If you do have an opinion on was it malnourishment, was it lack of planning, was it logistics, or is the Mr. Beast production just cocked up, or is it something more fruity, you could say, in that respect. I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. And that is going to wrap up the end of the show today, so thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode of the show. Thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me, and I'll see you very, very soon.